Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. So, the long awaited second U.S. Congressional UAP hearing was finally held on Wednesday, November the 13th at 11:30 a.m. It was titled Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon Exposing the Truth. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Accountability administered this hearing, and it was held at the Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C. Here's a clip where Nancy Mace opens up the hearing.
And we will hear testimony today concerning recent revelations about a purportedly secret UAP program whose existence and findings may have been improperly withheld from Congress. But before we get to the witnesses, we're going to have a few more opening statements from our colleagues. And one thing I wanted to add at the end of my closing statement is there is a document that will be entered into the congressional record today. Mr. Tim Burchett from Tennessee has this document, and we just distributed it to every member up here on the dais of this document. But this is going to be the original document from the Pentagon about Immaculate Constellation that Michael Schellenberger delivered to Congress today in real time now, and Mr. Burchett will enter it into the record. But 12 pages about this unacknowledged special access program that your government says does not exist.
Okay, so that was Nancy Mace opening up the hearing and making a reference to Michael Schellenberger's first engineering program that the government supposedly has. And the program is called Immaculate Constellation. And here were the four panelists or the witnesses that were featured in the second UAP congressional hearing. And of course, on your immediate left, if you're seeing this visual, is Luis Elizondo, famous whistleblower and also author, former Department of Defense official. And next to him is Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who's retired from the U.S. Navy. He was a chief executive officer. He's also involved with the Ocean Consulting. He also gave testimony on USOs, or underwater submerged objects, which are basically UFOs that go underneath the water. And third from the left is Michael Schellenberger, which Nancy Mace referred to in her opening statements. He is the writer who exposed Immaculate Constellation, a report on the U.S. government's secret UAP or UFO program. And then finally, the least known, I think, would be Michael Gold on the far right, if you guys are seeing this. Michael Gold is a former NASA Associate Administrator of Space Policy and Partnerships. He's also a member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team. I'd like to move on with some more highlights. And here's Representative Luna asking Lou Elizondo about UAP pilots and whether they are interdimensional or, quote, living craft. Lou Elizondo gives some background information in response about UAP's abilities, and then ends by saying, quote, we are constantly having to reevaluate what the definition of life is. Check it out.
Mr. Elizondo, in regards to these aircraft being piloted by whatever they might be, non-human biologics, would you agree that it's likely that they are being piloted by some mind-body connection?
Ma'am, I think it is safe to presume here that they are being intelligently controlled because some cases seem to anticipate our maneuvers, and in other cases they seem to I came across an email where the word stalked was used in a very secure email between Navy officers discussing their ships being pursued by a UAP.
In our previous panel, we had Grush, and he had testified to say that some of these were interdimensional beings. Can you speak on that at all?
Ma'am, I'm not qualified, certainly as a scientist or otherwise, to speculate points of origin. I looked at everything from a scientific perspective. So if you look at, for example, instantaneous acceleration, which was one of the observables of the program that I belong to, ATIP, the human body can withstand about 9 G-forces for a short period of time before you suffer negative biological consequences, blackouts and ultimately redouts and even death. Comparison, our best technology, the F-16, which is this older platform, but one of our most highly maneuverable aircraft, manned aircraft, made by General Dynamics, can perform about 17 or 18 G-forces before you start having structural failure, meaning that the airframe begins to disintegrate while you're flying. The vehicles we're talking about are performing in excess of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Gs.
So are you, I guess, would it be safe to infer that they're living craft?
You know, I'm not prepared at this point to state for the record is something alive or not, because even that definition is hard. There was a time in science we thought that life required oxygen, and we now know that's not true. There are anaerobic bacteria that thrive in oxygen environments that lack oxygen. And so also same with photosynthesis. When I was in college, I was told everything is derived from photosynthesis as a form of energy. In reality, that's not true. There are things that live off of chemosynthesis. So we're constantly having to reevaluate our understanding of what the definition of life is.
I just want to show this last clip because it shows all panelists being questioned about some significant questions. Number one, do they believe that any part of the government might knowingly be hiding information about UAP? And then secondly, what do they individually think UAP are?
Any part of the federal government is knowingly concealing evidence about UAPs from the public.
Yes, sir. 100%.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. I also want to just go down the line. I know many of you have already said this, but just for the record again, just briefly, what do you believe UAPs could be or are?
Strong evidence that they are non-human, higher intelligence.
I echo my colleague's comment, sir.
Genuinely do not know.
Don't know, but we must find out. Okay, thank you. Any part?
Okay, I'd like to conclude my very brief review of the second UAP hearing by referring to a post by ufologist Michael Salla. Okay, this is a post by Michael Salla on X, and he thinks that the congressional hearing will likely fuel another round of legacy media stories on UFOs, and he gives some highlights on each person's response on the panel. For Luis Elizondo, he has that Luis Elizondo claims there is a multi-decades-long UFO crash retrieval program. Luis Elizondo also said whistleblowers were punished and threatened for revealing UFO information. Also, Luis Elizondo said UFOs accelerate over 1,000 G. UFOs are non-human intelligence. Pentagon is hiding information from Congress and the public. And Lou also confirmed that Pentagon blocked transfer of UFO material from Lockheed to Bigelow Aerospace. Lastly, Lou said UFOs are intruding into sensitive military airspace and interfering with nuclear assets. For Tim Gallaudet, the retired Navy Rear Admiral, he has Arrow tried to influence him to backtrack on UAP information during a visit early in 2024. Tim Gallaudet also saw an official email describing the 2015 GoFast incident that was then withdrawn from circulation, indicating the UAP incident had become highly classified. Okay, so it was initially hidden. Tim Gallaudet also said Navy pilot safety has been threatened by UFOs, and USOs have outpaced U.S. Marines by orders of magnitude. And UAPs are non-human intelligence. Okay, and Tim Gallaudet should know about USOs since he was a Rear Admiral in the Navy. And for Michael Schellenberger, Michael Salla says that the Immaculate Constellation is Unacknowledged Special Access Program concerning data collecting UFOs. Okay, and he said that very clearly in his article. Okay, so Michael Schellenberger, as the author of the IC report, is credible, and other sources have confirmed it to be Schellenberger. So he's the one that put out that expose on the Immaculate Constellation about the government having a reverse engineering program for UAP. That report also contains hundreds, if not thousands, of high-resolution images of UFOs that have not been released. And that document, by the way, was given to Congress at the beginning. If you recall, Nancy Mace making a statement about receiving the original Immaculate Constellation document. Lastly, from Michael Schellenberger, we know from him that he says UAP craft were orbs, discs, triangles, and organic. Finally, Michael Gold, he provided information about NASA being a paradigm of UFO transparency, and he wasn't joking about that. I guess Michael Sala doesn't really believe NASA is a paradigm of UFO transparency. So one has to wonder whether Michael Gold was there for this information. And Michael Gold also said the vast majority of UAPs are drones and experimental craft. Again, might be a bit of misinformation, although there's some truth to that. I'm sure not all the drones that are reported are extraterrestrial. Michael Gold also advocates tailored instruments to examine UAP data, and he also recommends more funding for NASA. And that makes sense, since he is a NASA representative. Sala concludes by saying, regarding claims of people having direct physical contact with non-human intelligence associated with UFOs, no one on the panel had knowledge of such contact. So there was never any statements made about one-on-one contact with extraterrestrial or NHI. Similarly, when it came to communications with NHI, aside from Elizondo referring generally to nonverbal communication, no one had a response. When it came to claims of NHI and genetic experiments creating hybrid humans, no one on the panel had a response. So overall, the panel did not break any new ground, according to Dr. Sala, from its July 2023 predecessor, but it should be effective in maintaining a high level of public interest in UFOs. And I agree. If anything, it will maintain a public interest in UFOs. So the second UAP hearing, conducted by two subcommittees from the House Oversight Committee, has gone down in history. Absent were the 40 whistleblowers Grush had referred to in the first UAP hearing. And I'm sure a lot of us are wondering what happened to those 40 whistleblowers that Grush had promised. But committee members in this second hearing did ask the panel of 4 experts a series of probing questions about UAP, UFOs. This indicates, in my opinion, that UAP is a topic worthy of the government's attention, and that in and of itself is an accomplishment and progress as far as UFO transparency, in my opinion. So what does the future hold as far as UAP transparency? I saw this on Radar. Trump determined to make full disclosure of government alien files that have been buried for decades, says U.S. Congressman. And it's an online article by Catherine Tinsley. And it says that Congressman Tim Burchett claimed he and Trump have discussed the possibility of aliens existing in the universe. And Burchett is quoted as saying, President Trump will move toward total disclosure, and that's what's going to have to happen. He continued, quote, we have these government bureaucrats who keep saying they don't exist. The best pilots in the world are telling us these things are flying within close proximity to their aircraft. In my conversation with the president-elect, I'm convinced that's what he wants, full disclosure, and that he trusts the American public. And in his interview with Joe Rogan, Trump and the popular podcaster chatted about extraterrestrial. Trump stated, quote, "There is a lot of interest in the people coming from space, you know. I have to be honest, I have never been a believer, but I interviewed jet pilots that were solid people, perfect. I mean, great pilots, great everything. And they said, we saw things, sir, that were very strange, like a round ball. But it wasn't a comet or a meteor. It was something, and it was going 4 times faster than an F-22, which is a very fast plane." He added, quote, "There's no reason not to believe." So if you believe Representative Tim Burchett, the future is promising for UAP disclosure. If Trump really means what he said there, he might be an advocate for UAP transparency. I'd like to switch gears now. And in the spirit of UAP transparency, I'd like to now cover a story that occurred in 1988. It involves a family in Australia and their unusual yet striking experience with a UAP. So I got this on an online newsletter called the Museum of Lost Things, and it's entitled Aliens on the Null Arbor by Museum of Lost. In 1988, an Australian family encountered something strange while driving from Perth to Adelaide. Was it mass hysteria or aliens on the Null Arbor? Here's a picture of the family here, 3 sons and the mom. So in January 1988, Faye Knowles, which is pictured here in the center, decided to relocate to Adelaide from Perth with her children. The single parent was looking for new opportunities and wanted a fresh start. She and her 3 adult sons, Patrick, 24, Wayne, 21, and Sean, 18, decided to go by car. A lengthy trip of 2,700 kilometers through one of Australia's most isolated areas. Faye had recently purchased a new Ford Telstar, and they could share the driving between them. The road trip would be an exciting small adventure, the perfect start to this new chapter. If you guys can see this, there's a map of Australia, and you can see where Null Arbor is. It's sort of towards the southern part of Australia. Between Perth and Adelaide lies Null Arbor. So you can see where they traveled from Perth to Adelaide, and they had to go through Null Arbor, which is where the incident occurred. The Null Arbor is an enormous stretch of arid land measuring around 200,000 square kilometers, sitting between the Great Australian Bight and the Great Victorian Desert Hot. Dry and largely featureless, this is remote and hostile terrain. But I guess Faye thought that since they had the new car, that it should be okay. It might be an adventure. Okay, the article goes on to say, to travel across the Null Arbor is to feel that you have left civilization behind. So they were in a very remote area, which tends to be the places where these UAP incidents occur. So on January the 20th, 1988, the Knowles family arrived at Ceduna at the eastern end of the Eyre Highway. They had successfully navigated the Null Arbor, but were not in good shape. The car was in a state of disrepair and the family members hysterical. They hurried to the local police station. Sergeant Fred Longley was on duty. The car was damaged and covered in ash. They were clearly shaken up, said Sergeant Longley of the Ceduna Police. What the Knowles told Longley was a sensational story. Crossing the Null Arbor the night before, they had been attacked by a UFO. And here's a sketch of them in the car and the UAP attached to the roof of their car. And it's sort of a cylindrical orb with a suction that is attached to the roof of their car. So around 2:45 a.m. on January the 20th, the Knowles were heading east, about 40 kilometers west of Mundrabilia near the West Australian border. Sean was at the wheel when they saw something strange in the road ahead. Quote, "It was about a meter wide and glowing bright white with a yellow center." Okay, so it did have a center in it, and I guess I forgot to mention that in the sketch. And the light was like an egg in a teacup. Okay, which reminds me of a lot of UFO sightings that mention orbs and craft that look like eggs. The light then appeared to chase after a truck the Knowles passed, heading in the opposite direction, but it subsequently returned and began to pursue them. That's kind of scary. Sean now hit the gas and accelerated the car to its top speed. The bright light caught up to them easily. It was now much larger, having seemingly expanded. Wow. When the light was overhead, something seemed to land on the car's roof and lifted it into the air. Okay, that's unusual. It actually lifted the car up into the air. In the panic of the moment, the family would later report strange sensations, a feeling of time slowing down and their own voices becoming distorted. Faye, which was the mother, put her hand on the window to try and work out what had hold of them. She says, and this is a quote from Faye Knowles, "I went down the window and felt this thing on the roof. All this smoke stuff started coming into the car, and the car was covered in black stuff." Faye would later describe what she felt as having an unusual spongy texture. Okay, I think that's the first time I've ever heard a UAP described as having a spongy texture. Okay, just as suddenly, the car was released again and crashed back to the road. So it just picked them up, I guess, momentarily for some reason. The light disappeared, and now the family were alone in the dark, terrified. They fled from the vehicle and hid in some low bushes nearby. So they abandoned the car and they hid underneath some bushes nearby. All right. But when the light did not come back, they calmed down sufficiently to return to their car. They quickly fixed the flat tire and then continued to Mundrabilia, where they reported what had happened to staff at the roadhouse. According to some reports, a truck driver there also indicated he had seen unusual lights on the road. After a short pit stop, the family then drove the remaining 500 kilometers to Sedona, where they reported what had happened to police. Here's a headline at a local newspaper saying the UFO attacks family, close encounter on Nullarbor. So the article goes on to say, when the story broke the next day, the media coverage was voluminous. UFO attacks family leading the morning news. And that was the headline on the newspaper I just showed. The story elements were intriguing, the isolated location and the drama of an actual physical encounter, but the Knowles incident had additional aspects not commonly found in UFO stories. Yeah, like the spongy texture for one. Okay, so the article goes on to say there was tangible evidence that something had happened. Dents on the car roof and ash covering the vehicle's exterior. Then there was the initial police response, with Sergeant Longley stating that they, quote, had to take the report seriously, which added credence to the story. Some news reports also cited a commercial fishing vessel in the bight that also reported seeing lights in the sky. And here's a picture of the Knowles family being interviewed on TV. And the article ends by saying, a family of everyday Aussies, they did not seem like the sort to make up a bizarre UFO story. A few days after the incident, they were interviewed together on TV and impressed with their sincerity. We should check out that video because they do come across as very believable and, if not, very scared.
Nullarbor plane. Terrified members of the Knowles family claimed a bright flying object sucked their car off the ground.
It was early yesterday morning when the Knowles family had their close encounter on the Nullarbor plain. About halfway between Melbourne and Perth, their blue Ford Telstar was chased by what they told police was an extremely bright white light. The egg-shaped object hovered above the car, lifting it more than a metre off the ground. Police at Ceduna in South Australia were today at a loss to explain the sighting.
The sun.
Samples of ash taken from the Knowles car have been sent to police forensic scientists for study.
A Perth family claims it's been confronted by a UFO while crossing the Nullarbor. Their story's been backed by other motorists, and the crew of 2 South Australian fishing boats have also reported being buzzed by a UFO.
For the Knowles family, it was to have been a routine drive across the Nullarbor. That all changed as the family approached the town of Mundrabilla on the air highway. They claim that's when they had their unexpected and terrifying encounter with the unknown.
The car was shaking. I went down the window and I said it's on top of the roof. And all this, I don't know what it was, it all come inside the car like smoke. We thought we were all dead.
And I went down my window and Mum said there's something on the roof. And I said, no, come off it, you know, you've got to be joking. And she went down her window and she put her hand on the roof and she goes, my God. She goes, what is it? And no, I swear to God, I'm not lying. I swear to God, I opened up my window and the car started going out of control. And all this smoke, and it was like smoke. I'm not lying. It was like smoke. And gases all started coming in the car. And me and my brother started to go crazy, you know. I thought I was going in my head. Felt like my brain was getting sucked out.
Another motorist and a truck driver also witnessed the incident. They confirm the Knowles family story. Police are investigating the claim. They say the car did have dents on the roof and an ash substance inside.
It was not a star, but could not identify what it was. Later, inland at Mundrabilla Roadhouse, near the West Australian-South Australian border, a truck driver reported that he had also seen an incredible light in the sky. At 5:30 yesterday morning, a West Australian family of 4 travelling east say a UFO landed on their car. They were travelling at 200 kilometres an hour at the time. The object was emitting an extremely bright light. And they were travelling in the same area as the previous sightings. In a moment I'll talk with the family, but first, Emily Booker with this report on the strange goings-on in that part of Australia.
History is dotted with strange lights and reported visits to Earth of UFOs. Australia itself records 180 sightings a year, and although 92% of these turn out to be planes, clouds or some other natural phenomenon, 8% are never explained. And it is the skies to the west and south of this vast continent which have played host most frequently to the suspected flying saucers. For the Port Neal community in South Australia, the visit of a UFO wasn't confined to the skies. Whatever the object was, there's no doubt from these pictures that it landed on the Rodders property.
There's something that's causing these things that we can't explain, so...
Now the UFOs have disturbed the peace of the southwestern skies yet again. The Knowles family of Perth were in their car heading across the Nullarbor plain when a bright light appeared above them, picked up their car and dropped it.
Well, to the Knowles family in Adelaide, thanks for joining us. And 36 hours now after the event, do any of you have any doubts as to what happened? Do you still believe that it was a UFO that landed on your car?
Yes, we do.
Why do you believe that?
Because we actually saw it, you know. It was chasing us, and it all of a sudden it landed on our car, pulled our car back, and I put my hand out the window, and I fell on the roof.
What did you feel?
It was like a sponge on the roof. It was sucking the roof, you know, the car. It was a sponge. I saw it.
How big was it? What did it look like?
It was
about... it was shaped like this. Hang on. It was shaped like this. Had like a little circle in the centre, and that was like a yellow sort of colour. And so I got up closer to have a look, and it was moving backwards and forwards. And so we decided to take off to have a look. We decided to take off, and it was flying miles back, and I drove miles up the road again, and it was in front of us again.
How high off the ground was it?
It was on the ground.
I mean, it was on the ground.
It was on the ground, facing us when we were driving along.
And then, so it was moving along with you?
Yeah, it was following us.
And then eventually you tried to get away from it, is that right?
It's still chasing us.
Sean, you were driving. How fast did you get up to?
I got up to about 200 kilometres.
And at what stage did the object land on your roof?
Oh.
How fast were you going at the time?
I was doing about 200. I got a blowout, and once the car stopped, I blinked out, and I don't know what happened after that.
It was definitely on the roof.
How do we know you're telling the truth?
Oh, there was even witnesses.
But a lot of people think that you are making it up. Do you realise that?
That's not true. No way.
When it landed on the car, what happened?
We were screaming and yelling.
And as soon as it landed on the car, that's when my tyre blew out.
There was one report that your voices changed, is that correct?
Yes, they did.
I did.
In what way?
Really deep and slow, and I don't know. We started to sound like that. Real deep, deeper than that even. It was so deep, it's really hard to explain. More or less like our voice kind of died out as we were talking.
If a car has a blowout at 200 kilometres an hour, there is a danger, isn't it, that it will overturn. How come you didn't?
There was a weight on the roof, and explain that.
Were there any sounds or smells?
Yes, it was.
There was a sound. It sounded like a humming sound. It sounded like boom, boom, boom. And when it was on the roof, I wound down my window, and all this smoke started coming. It was like a greyish black mist. And that's when our voices started to change. All of us, our voices just went really deep and strange. And we felt like we were dying. And the brake, my brother chucked the brakes on the car, and this thing just shot off. And as it shot off, we just hid out in the bushes. Got out the car, hid out in the bushes, waited for about 10-15 minutes. Went over back to the car, took the wheel off, chucked that in the boot, got the spare wheel out, put that on, and we just let down Jack. We didn't worry about Jack, we just chucked the Jack in the bushes, and we just shut off. And then it started to follow us again. And it started to come by then it was starting to get daylight, and it just seemed to lose us for some reason. We turned the headlights off, and that's when it lost us.
Patrick, had any of you been drinking?
No way, no.
Were you tired?
I was a bit tired, yeah, but not tired enough to see a thing like that. And
how scared were you, Patrick?
Oh, really scared.
Terrified.
Scared as I've ever been.
So Australia has a lot of UFO sightings. Even back then, and this video is old, it claimed to have over 180 sightings per year, all of which are resolved except for 8%, which makes that about 14, 15 sightings a year that go unresolved. This case, the Knowles family, struck me as very interesting, not only because of how traumatized the family was even after the incident, but because it involved some sort of an orb, which had been reported recently in the news as far as UAP. I also thought it was interesting that the orb picked up the car and then dropped it. It was also reported by Faye, the mother, that she felt the object on top of the car roof, and it had some sort of a spongy texture that I thought was highly unusual. There were also reported witnesses. There was a truck driver that saw unusual lights on the road that same evening. They heard a humming sound, but more than anything, I think that you'll agree with me that the family is honestly still traumatized, even when they're giving the report on what happened to them. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I thought it was a nice accompaniment to the second UAP Congressional Hearing review. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks. Thanks for listening to my podcast.